אוקיי. פה זה טוב? כן. הנה, I can sit on the couch a little bit.
Good.
Okay. This is Gidon Lev. I'm Gaia Golan. It's September 23rd, 2023. We're in Ramat Gan, Israel. This interview will take place in English. Such as that.
I'm rolling.
Shoot.
Shoot.
Take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Gidon Lev. I was born in 1935 in Karlovy Vary. In German it's called Karlsbad in Czechoslovakia, to a middle-class family, one side speaking mostly German, one side speaking mostly Czech, and I learned actually 2 languages at the same time at home. It was pre-war 1935, and I was a happy toddler.
How do you spell your name now?
My name now is Gidon Lev, Gidon-Lev, but that was not my original name. My original name was actually Peter Wolfgang Löw. Peter for Peter, Wolfgang, my middle name, which is actually very un-Jewish, because my grandfather must have loved Mozart. He played the viola, and I guess he convinced my mother to give me the middle name as Wolfgang, which comes from, of course, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He must have loved Mozart. I love Mozart too. And so I actually didn't even know that that was my middle name. Only long time after the war, I saw a birth certificate which had survived the war. And there it's written, Peter Wolfgang Löw. Then I asked my mother, and she explained to me.
And where you grew up, what country was that in?
That was in Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was born in 1918 as a result of the agreement at Marseille in 1918, where the Austro-Hungarian Empire that had lost the First World War very badly was split up into half a dozen other little countries, actually not so little, with Germany still maintaining a huge amount of territory. But then what was born was Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, I'm not sure whether it was also Bulgaria, Romania. A lot of smaller countries were split up into new nations. And Czechoslovakia was one of those nations that was born. And the borders of Czechoslovakia were actually natural borders. They didn't just go through a field. They went woods, rivers, so that the geographical borders of Czechoslovakia were easily defendable. Because in order to conquer Czechoslovakia, you had to go through the woods and high mountains, and it's not so easy. That's why the whole business of the 1938 agreement with Mussolini, Chamberlain, and Hitler was so detrimental to the very existence of Czechoslovakia as a nation.
Did you feel a direct impact of that agreement?
Now we have to remember that I was a little kid, right? I was 1938, I was 3 years old. So I hardly was aware what was going on around me. But yes, of course, there were all kinds of new restrictions and new orders as soon as the Germans entered Czechoslovakia. Now we have to remember that Hitler at Munich, at the Munich Agreement, which as I said before, was without the Czech representation. Just imagine, Czechoslovakia was being split up and the Czechs weren't part of the agreement. Why? Because Hitler didn't recognize the very existence of Czechoslovakia. He didn't. So why have them represented? Why was Mussolini invited to this? He had no connection at all, because he was a fascist. And he supported Hitler. And Chamberlain, who wanted to prevent another war, because he had seen and lived through the First World War, which was no less horrific than the Second World War, wanted to prevent. But in order to do that, he must have closed his eyes, closed his ears, stopped his brain from functioning, because everybody knew that Hitler in 1938 had a huge military armament program and was preparing for war, producing tanks, submarines, machine guns, special motorcycles with a side, what would you call it? A side seat on a motorcycle that one was driving the motorcycle and the other guy was with a machine gun that could shoot people as they drove along. So it was very clear to everybody that this is, in plain language, bullshit. But Hitler said, all I want is Sudetenland, the westernmost part of Czechoslovakia, where many Germans actually lived. But they wanted to be part of Germany. So when Hitler got that, they said, oh, finally the Germans have retaken part of what belongs to Germany. And at that point, we, Jews, who were living in that area, immediately were a target for pogroms, for laws that totally did away with rights. Jews at that point couldn't work in a municipality, couldn't be teachers, couldn't be doctors in hospital, couldn't be nurses, couldn't anything that Jews did was taken away from them. Besides the fact that Jewish stores had to put a sign, or the Germans that lived in that area put Jude on the store, and nobody was that wasn't Jewish was allowed to buy things or sell things. And my parents and grandparents, who owned a what do you call it, a scrap iron yard, they used to buy scrap iron from factories that maybe went broke, and then resell it and made a good living. But once the Germans had taken over, there was nothing there anymore to do, because nobody was able to sell to Jews or wanted to sell to Jews or was not allowed to sell, and nobody was prepared to buy anything from Jews. And I have even a memory, not so much a memory, but my mother told me that we, for example, had a nanny in our house, because we are middle class people. And my mother used to tell to my children, to her grandchildren afterward. You know, when I was living in Karlovy Vary and Peter was growing up and he was a baby, I never had any worries at all. We had a nanny and we had bells all over the apartment, and every time Peter started to cry or make noise, I would press the button, the nanny would jump and go and take care of him, change his diapers, take him for a walk, and I could quietly continue relaxing, reading my book or listening to music. So this nanny, who wasn't Jewish, couldn't anymore work. Why? Not because she didn't want to, but because she was afraid. What? You're working for Jews? Not possible. Not possible. Even if she wanted to, because it was her living, she was afraid. She would be ostracized, who knows, maybe even beaten, maybe even raped. The fear and the terrible strain and the fear of oppression and separation and isolation was all around. And I was only 3 years old. So I didn't really know, but still there was a terrible atmosphere of insecurity. Any moment, Germans, whether they be soldiers, SS, or just plain ordinary Germans living in Karlovy Vary, could come to your apartment, knock, and maybe destroy everything you had. So I was born in 1935. Hitler took over in 1938 that part of Czechoslovakia, and for them it was easy. Within half an hour of signing the agreement at Munich, the German army on the main road, because that's the only way they could get into Czechoslovakia without having to go through the woods and the high mountains, was inside the country. And once you're inside the country, the road is free. And my parents thought, okay, we can't stay here anymore in Karlovy Vary. We have to go maybe to Prague.
Before we move forward, your parents, what was your mother's name?
My mother's name was Doris Löw. And she was born, her maiden name was Samish. And she was born in Karlovy Vary, actually, in 1912. And my father was born in Most in, I think, 1903. He was a little bit older than my mother, 9 years older. And she was brought up by her parents, my grandparents. And something happened when she was growing up. Should I tell you about it? Yes, okay. So, my grandfather, my mother's father, his name was Fritz, or in Czech, Bedřich. And he was a bank manager who had married the bank owner's daughter. Beautiful lady. Her name was Lise. And it was a marriage of love, as far as I can know. And the First World War, he was drafted by the Germans into the German-Hungarian army. And he served it for 4 years. Fact is, he was even a power, what do you call a power? A captive by the British, by the English. And so he actually was 5 years gone. And during that time, maybe once or twice, he came and visited us. Because I know, because my mother, in one photo that I have, she's wearing his army hat. So he must have come for a visit. But what happened was that after the war, for some reason, my great-grandmother and my aunt, my grandfather's sister, somehow felt that my mother's mother, Liesel, while he was in the army, had been unfaithful to him. I don't know what the story is behind it, but what happened is it wasn't true. One cousin who survived the war said that it was all made up because they were jealous of her, because she was outgoing, she was very pretty, she was very lively, and she was raising my mother. She was raising my mother. 1912. So the war started in 1914. So she must have been 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. All these 4 years, 5 years, my grandmother was raising my mother alone. After the war, when the war finished and he came back from captivity, they told him that she had been unfaithful, and he divorced her. He believed him, he divorced her. And the strangest thing happened. Just imagine, my mother was 6, 7 years old, being raised by her mother, taken care of, everything. And the natural thing would have been, even today, that the daughter goes with her mother. But this didn't happen. My mother stayed with her father, and my grandmother was sent to Vienna to her parents, who were living in that time. The whole thing is very complicated, because remember I said that my grandfather married the bank owner's daughter. So maybe there was an effort to hush everything up, to smooth everything up. Send her away, keep the daughter with her. How traumatic and terribly this must have been for my mother, I can't even imagine. What I can say here now is that in all the years after the war, after 1945, till she died in 2003, here in Israel, she never once mentioned her mother. Never once mentioned her mother. And I stupidly didn't ask, didn't interest myself in it, didn't try and ask her, well, what happened? Why? And of course, my mother was emotionally hurt to the point where she was even cruel to me in many ways. So things are very complicated. In most families they are, and certainly in my families. And one of my biggest regrets, if not the biggest, is that I didn't get it together enough as I was living here, and she was living here also for something like 8 or 9 years. Mom, tell me a little bit, what happened? How did you feel? What did you do? How come you never speak about your mom? I'm so sorry about that.
Was your mother's family religious?
My mother's family and my father's family were not religious. They were Jewish. They didn't deny being Jewish. But they were assimilated Jews, non-religious. They celebrated Hanukkah, they lit the Hanukkah candles. They even, my parents, my mother, even had, I remember that we had a Christmas tree, Hanukkah and Christmas tree. Both. Crazy, of course, crazy. And they probably went to Yom Kippur synagogue maybe at the end of the service, and they celebrated maybe to some extent Passover. That I sort of recall, but really what the Jewishness was on a very low key. They were Jewish, but without denying it, but not religiously observant. The fact is, years later, when I arrived in the United States in 1948 with my mother after the war, for the first time I discovered kosher. I didn't even know what was kosher. Mother kosher, what is kosher? I didn't know. I learned it in Brooklyn, New York. Not because my great aunt was kosher, but because we spoke about it. So there was a cousin there too living, and I learned it from there. So it was a whole mixture of many things. Going back a little bit, I would like to say something that I remember as a child. We have to remember that the war in 1938, I was 3 years old. We moved to Prague in 3 months after the Germans had taken over. And I hardly knew, but I had a birthday. My birthday is in March. And I remember that I received a tricycle, a red, new, beautiful tricycle with black handlebars. And I loved it. My mother used to say, you want to ride it into your bed? I would ride it all day. And when they decided that we have to move to Prague because this is impossible, we can't make a living, we can't feel free, we're afraid, the Germans are totally isolating us and not buying and not selling, and it was terrible. So we said, we'll go to Prague. Prague was still Czechoslovakia. I came in the middle of the night. We came to the train station in Karlovy Vary, and we had knapsacks and suitcases and bedrolls and a lot of stuff. And I came with what? My tricycle, of course. And I came with my tricycle, and I wanted to go in, get on the train. And my parents said, no, you can't. We have too many things. But I cried. I said, oh, please, I want to, please. And even my grandfather, Alfred, said, lass ihn, ich nehm's him. I'll take it for him. No, 9. So it stayed there in the station someplace. And my father said, we'll buy you a new one. That never happened. Got on a train, cried. Get over it. And we arrived in Prague. But that stayed with me, that memory. I find it so debilitating, so cruel, that it's one of the memories that I've taken with me for the last 80-some years. And that's how things started off, how things finished in in Karlovy Vary.
When was this that you took the train to Prague?
It was 3 months after the Germans took over the Sudetim. It can be all checked, the exact dates. Between the time that they signed the Munich Agreement and the time that we left for Prague, I think something like 3 or 4 months went by, and then we moved to Prague. And the interesting thing about that is that, of course, besides our suitcases and bedrolls and knapsack that we had furniture and porcelain and all kinds of beautiful things in our home, pictures and stuff. And they hired a mover and paid him, and the mover was supposed to bring all our belongings to Prague. It never arrived. It never arrived. And my parents couldn't do anything because Jews had no way of complaining or going to... If you went to complain to a police station, it was already controlled by the Nazis. So, you probably took that anyway from somebody. You probably stole that from them. He'll bring it to you. Maybe next year he'll bring it to you. Whatever. He had no recourse to justice, to what's right. None whatsoever. But after the war, after my mother and I survived Theresienstadt, we came back to Karlovy Vary, Karlsbad, and my mother took, this was in 1945, probably sometimes, the war finished in May, June, July, probably around August 1945, and my mother took a Czech policeman, went to the mover's home. She had his name and his address. And what do you think? Everything, everything that belonged to us was there in his home. Our furniture, our porcelain, our bedding, because we were middle class, so we had sheets and pillowcases that had a monogram on the sheets. So it was clear it was ours. Couldn't be denied. And he didn't deny it. When they asked him, why didn't you bring it? I couldn't bring it. The Germans didn't let me. Oh, no. Bullshit. Not true. Of course he could have. He didn't want to, but he brought it all. But the good thing about what else, first of all, that we received all our things back, including something that I remember as a little boy. I had a Eibecher, a soft-boiled little cup with a little rabbit, like an Easter rabbit, and even that I got back. And more important than anything else, pictures. He kept here. I can show you. This was full. You see, it's all broken and falling apart because it's so old. All this was full of photos, some of them maybe 150 years old, of grandparents, great-grandparents. I would never have any pictures of any, because Jews that went to concentration camps, they didn't take pictures of them, or if they did, they lost them or were taken away. But because this man kept everything, including pictures, I don't know why he kept the pictures, but he kept it. And I have it here today. And proof of things that I didn't even realize that existed. So there are all kinds of things that happen in history and life. And this is one of those little miracles, that this man didn't deliver our things, but kept them in his house, and we were able to get them all back. Some things were very valuable, because Czech porcelain and Czech crystal is very famous, and we had quite a lot of it. And we got it all back after the war. The only problem was, it was only my mother and me who had survived. All the rest of the family, something like 26 and maybe more family members, were gone, never to come back again.
What about your father's family? Can you tell me a bit about them?
My father's family, okay, my father's family, first of all, was much smaller than my mother's family, as far as I know. I only know that my father had a cousin who survived because her husband was somewhat of a politician in Czechoslovakia before the war, and he managed, together with my cousin Paula, to leave Czechoslovakia, make it to England, and from England to Canada. And later on, in the years, many years later, I met her in Canada, and it's a long story, but she was a very lively and good woman. And my grandfather, Alfred, died in Theresienstadt, under operating. He had arrived there on December 14th and was very ill. They put him in a sort of hospital. It wasn't actually a hospital, sort of a sick room. And there were some very good doctors there, because the Czechs had good doctors and they were good. But there were no medications, there were no painkillers. And he died on an operating table. We have actually a document that says that when he died, from what he died, and that he died. My grandmother, Alfred's wife, died actually in Prague, in Praha, before they shipped us out to Theresienstadt. So I know, I think there's also another cousin who survived the concentration camps, Theresienstadt, and I think, I'm not sure, that she spent some time in Theresienstadt, and she is the one who actually taught me how to read and write. I remember vaguely that a number of times I went to the place where she was being held in Theresienstadt, which was a concentration camp, and she must have taught me to read and write, because in 1945, when the Russians freed us and we went back to Prague and then to Karlsbad, I was allowed to go to school, and I didn't have to go to grade 1. I was 10 years old. They put me in grade 3. They put me in grade 3, that meant I already knew how to read and write. And I guess maybe not well, but I knew. And it's an interesting thing. I'll tell you about that. We're jumping back and forth a little bit, but that's the way things are. I went to school right around the corner from where we lived after the war in Karlovy Vary, and I was in a classroom, and one day the teacher, and I was a small kid, small naturally, but small maybe also because of poor nourishment in a concentration camp. And, we were learning, and one day the teacher went out. I remember teacher went out of the room for a minute, and we were sitting around, and there was one kid who was about a head taller than me, which was not so hard to be. And I don't know for what reason, he came over to me and said, "Burbly Jid," which means stupid Jew. And I was a little kid. And I turned around and I punched him straight in the nose. He was shocked and started bleeding. And he ran into the corner of the classroom. There was a sink and a faucet there, and cleaned himself off. The whole class was shocked. And all of a sudden the teacher comes back into the room, and the class is quiet. The teacher looks. "Pavel, what are you doing?" And he said, "Peter punched me." "Peter punched you?" "Peter, why did you punch him?" "He called me a stupid Jew. Yid, Jid, Bubble, Jid." "Ah." "Pavel, finish and sit down." Class was quiet. Never again did anyone in that class call me a stupid Jew. Never again. And I felt good. I felt good. In comparison to the Poles and the Hungarians, the Czech population was the least anti-Semitic, the least. It doesn't mean that there were not some Czechs who were anti-Semites, but in comparison to the others, they were actually the least anti-Semitic. And this was one sign, but I reacted, and I'm happy. A little while ago when I was visiting Prague, because I was invited to Prague to the a association Jewish the Jewish European Association. They invited me and I gave actually a speech. I presented my story to some extent. And while we were there, I visited the school, and they let me in, and I actually saw the class that I had sat in many years ago. And I wrote in English, not in Czech, because I hardly remember Czech. "I went to school here in 1945, 6, 7. My name is Peter Lev. Thank you."
How did that make you feel?
Very good. Very good. Very good. It was reliving a little bit of history.
And going back, you talked about your father's father and about what was the name of your father's mother who died in Prague?
Teresa. And she's buried, she died when we moved from Karlovy Vary to Prague in June of 1938. She already was very ill. Some kind of stomach problem. I don't know what it was. I only remember that when we came to Prague to this apartment, she had her own little room and bed, and she was constantly moaning and complaining. And then she died, and she was buried actually in the biggest Jewish cemetery of Europe. And we went there, and we have a paper that says which row, which section, which grave. But because it was so overgrown with I don't know what's that called, that green leaves that sort of spread, we couldn't find it. We went there twice, actually. Recently we went there, trying again to find, couldn't be found. Part of the problem was that the Germans at a certain point used the stones from the cemetery to fix streets and all kinds of things that they did. So what we decided is, we decided to make a plaque, what do you call it in English? Sort of a memorial plaque, and wrote on it all the family members' names, dates of birth, dates of death, and where. And it's there now, because others had done the same, including my grandmother, Teresa, whom we know is buried there, but couldn't find her.
Did your grandparents also live with you in Karlovy Vary?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think we had our own apartment and they had their own apartment. But I can't be 100% sure. But my memory says, no, we lived alone. They lived alone, we lived alone. Oh, we were middle class, so we have the address where we lived actually. And too many stories. You get me going on something, my brain all of a sudden starts fraying. Oh, remember this, or remember that. You know, I just remember once going to the yard, to the scrap iron yard, and my grandpa saying to me, Peter, don't go near the dog. He's a vicious dog. He's a guard dog. And I remember, I stayed away. It was a big German Shepherd dog who was, guarding the yard from people who wanted to steal things. But no, we didn't live together. We lived separately, I'm sure.
When you arrived to Prague, what were your living arrangements there?
Oh, our living arrangements, there we lived all together in one apartment. Not a very big apartment. I don't totally remember exactly how many rooms it was, but it was at least 3 or 4 rooms, I'm sure. And I remember, now we have to remember that soon after the Germans had taken over the Sudetim, I think 3 or 4 months later, Hitler declared no more Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia has become a protectorate of Germany called Bohemia and Morava. And the German army on the main road, or railway, or both, send their tanks and trucks and motorcycles and whatever from Karlovy Vary straight into the rest of the country and took over. And Hitler himself came to Prague, and from the government house up on a hill, which was a castle, which is even today still a government seat, Hitler himself came there and declared the end of the existence of the Czechoslovakian Republic. And I was a little kid. I was 3 years old, not even 4 years old yet. But I remember my parents, unbelievable. It was just something that they couldn't have in their worst dreams imagined, that they Germans. And the minute that happened, the Germans took over control of the entire country. They were mostly interested, of course, in the industry, because Czechoslovakia, from all the other European countries, was the most industrialized. And you can see it. What cars do we see here a lot in Israel? Skoda. Skoda is a Czech car produced in Czechoslovakia. And that time there was Tatra and Skoda, and I don't remember other names. But it was very worthwhile for the Germans. They wanted the Czech industry. And they started, of course, systematic isolation, deprivation, humiliation, segregation of Jews. Step by step. Every week, every other week, a new decree was announced. And even though I was 4 or 5 years old, I felt it. I didn't know the details. I went to kindergarten at the beginning, but I think after a while Jewish kids couldn't go to a kindergarten because they were Jews. And Jewish people couldn't go to restaurants. And Jewish people couldn't own a motorcycle, a car, even a bicycle. All Jewish documents, whatever they were, had to have a J on it, marked Jude. Jewish people couldn't own a radio, a typewriter, a camera, anything of value. If you kept the radio and were listening to BBC and a neighbor who wasn't Jewish heard it and reported it, the next day or the same night, the Gestapo would come, confiscate the radio and the people. You never saw the people again. Jewish people couldn't even ride freely on the tramway, on buses. Only certain ones, and only in the back, and only if there was room. There wasn't room? Wait another half hour till the next tram came. Jewish people couldn't own anything, including their own apartment, business. Everything had to be transferred to Germans. Sometimes the Jewish people made some agreements with some of the Czechs, but it was unofficial. Jews were simply separated from the rest of the population. Most of the Jews, especially in places like Prague and Brno, were assimilated. They were Jews, but they didn't go to synagogue and pray all day or whatever. And they were doctors and lawyers and artists and you know, intelligentsia. They played music, they were part of orchestras, there were doctors in the hospitals, there were all that. Day by day, week by week, they were more and more separated and more isolated, and their rights were taken from them. You came to the police station, Czech police station, under the command of some Nazi, and you complained that somebody stole your bicycle. The officer would say, "Well, you probably took the bicycle from somebody anyway. Okay, we'll put a report. Come back in a month and see if we have anything for you." And then afterwards, a few weeks later, Jews weren't allowed to own a bicycle. They weren't allowed to have a license for bicycle, for car, for anything. And then another step. And then you weren't allowed to visit public areas, not pools, not parks, not museums. Any public place was closed to Jews. And then finally, they came the last actually not the last, restriction. Every Jew had to wear a Star of David on their left side over the heart. Every Jew, if was caught and he didn't wear it and he was a Jew, you will never see him or her again. And I remember something about the restriction on going to parks, very specifically. This is memory that I actually do remember. Right around the corner from where we lived on a street called Italska 7. And right 2 blocks away or so, there was a little park with a playground with swings and slides and all kinds of things for the kids. And my grandfather, Alfred, from time to time would take me there. And I would run to the swings. There was one swing I loved. It was like in a form of a canoe. And I climbed in, and he would push me. And I loved it. I loved it. War, schmore. I was a little kid, 4 or 5 years old. What did I know what's really going on? And one day we come there, and he runs after me and said, "Peter, no, 999. You can't, we have to go." And I said, but Papa, Grandpa, why? What did I do? Was I not a good boy? Why am I being punished? He said, no, look. And he took me by in his arms, and he showed me over there on the sign, a new sign. It said, "Juden verboten." Jews are not allowed. And I hardly understood why. I know I was Jewish, but what does it mean? Why? What did I do? Why am I being punished? He tried to explain to me, but I really didn't understand. So it was, it was horrific. For me as a little kid, I remember the feeling. I remember the anger, the frustration, not understanding. So it came down to that. And once the Jews had to wear the star, people, even the Czechs, wouldn't even talk to you. They were afraid to talk to you. Before they made the Jews wear the star, so the Germans couldn't know who was a Jew and who wasn't, because contrary to what the Germans portrayed the Jews as all with big noses, it's not true. Not all Jews have big noses. So they couldn't always tell. But now that we were marked, they were afraid. Not that they necessarily wanted. People were neighbors, good relationships. But now they were afraid for themselves, even more than for them. So it was truly, step by step, an atmosphere of degradation, isolation, humiliation, to the point that I think people felt, what else can they do to us? What else? We have no rights, we have no work, we have no license, we can hardly subsist on money that we saved or we have. They won't give us work. And then came the next step. A resettlement of the Jews. A resettlement, not concentration camps, not, they called it Lager in German. But we're going to resettle the Jews. Where? Theresienstadt, in Czech Terezin, which was actually the only concentration camp in Czechoslovakia. It was about 55 kilometers northwest of Prague. It had been an army camp and a prison, both separate units, but close to each other, even before the First World War, during the Habsburg dynasty. And there were huge buildings there, 3 stories high. They called it Kaserne, barracks. We think of barracks as one-floor buildings, but this was well-built buildings for soldiers. Maybe a dozen, maybe 8 to 10 at least, each one with a name. And they started sending Jews to this place first of all from Czechoslovakia, first of all from Prague, because in Prague there was a huge amount of Jewish people living. And I remember my father and my grandfather came to the hospital where I was being operated on tonsillitis. They were removing my tonsils because I had been all the time sick, and turns out that my tonsils were infected and had to be removed. So I went to a hospital. Luckily, at that point, they were still allowed Jews to be treated, at least in some of the hospitals. And I remember my grandfather, Alfred, and my father, Ernst, coming to the hospital and saying that they're going to be sent to a new place for settlement, and that your mom and you are going to come there too later on. The Germans promised. So the first or second transport of men to set up this concentration, meaning to put up the fence and set up beds and all these 200, 300 men from the ages of, 17, 18 to something like 35, 40, I don't know exactly. And then they came to the hospital, and I couldn't even talk to them, because after tonsillitis you can't talk. It hurts. It hurts terribly. But they brought me one thing. They brought me ice cream, because that's the only thing a person can eat after you have your tonsils removed. It's ice cold. And they brought me, the name for ice cream in Czech is zmrzlina. Terrible word, hard to pronounce. And I was happy that they brought it, but I didn't understand what they were saying to me. And I couldn't say goodbye. But they spoke to me and they said goodbye. This was at the beginning of December, and we have documentation for this. My father and my grandfather went to Terezin. And 10 days later, on the 14th of December, my mother and I received also a notification that we have to report to a train station someplace outside of Prague, that trains went from there to Terezin. With all our belongings that we could carry, something like 50 kilos each, and we were going to join our fathers and husbands, and grandfathers in my case. The Germans had promised, the Germans are keeping their promise.
Where were your mother's parents?
Okay, your question.
While you were in Prague, where were your mother's parents?
Wow. It's a good question, and I answered very easy. They were living in Prague too. Now, just remember, my mother's father had remarried, and they had a son. So my mother had actually a half-brother about 8 or 9 years younger than her. And they were living in Prague. We even have the address. In fact, a great aunt was also living there with her husband and her son until, no, her son actually was already sent to America. The fact is, the family was there, and I actually remember one time visiting one of my families, I think the great aunt, and was sitting around the table like this, I remember, and in the middle was a whole basket of rolls. It's called not semmelknödel. I forgot what they were. Semmel rolls. They were sort of buns. I loved them. And I would take, and I had a cup of tea. And then I wanted to take another one. My mother kicked me under the table so not to take another one. It was not the right thing to do. Things like that, I remember. But I want to just say that our family actually all lived in Prague before they were sent to concentration camps. And we have documentation because on the lists where it says that you were sent to Theresienstadt or to other places, it says the date, the address, the date of birth, the date when you were sent, and so forth. So it's all documented. It's not a make-believe at all. Nobody can accuse us. When somebody, I was on TikTok the other time, and somebody said, "You are a liar, you lie." I said, "Yeah, really? I wish I was a liar. I wish I would lie, because if that was so, I would have had a father, grandfathers, grandmothers, aunts, uncles, cousins. I have none of those. I'm sorry. It was the truth, not a lie."
I'm interested, what languages did your family speak when you were growing up?
The languages we spoke was both German and Czech. I don't know if there was a difference in proficiency between my mother and my father. I have the suspicion that my father was better in Czech and my mother better in German. And if that's true or not, I'm really not sure. But I want to tell you another little incident that comes to mind while we were living in Prague. Now remember also, well, you don't remember, but I remember, that the Germans confiscated not only radios and televisions, radios and cameras and typewriters and whatever else, phones, but they also, of course, confiscated the bank, what do you call it? The bank accounts of the Jews, almost automatically. Every bank who knew that these people were Jews, their bank account was closed and transferred to the German Third Reich. So they had no money in the bank. Jews didn't have money in the bank. So my parents, or my father, maybe my grandfather, when they first left Karlovy Vary and came to Prague, I guess they must have taken their money, whatever money they could, out of the bank before it was closed, and where to hide it. So one day, I was down on the street, coming back, I think, from the park with my grandpa. That's before they stopped us from going to the park. And I see my father standing there with a lady, and she's yelling at him, "Why don't you tell your wife to be careful, and this is dangerous, and I don't know what to tell you." What happened? A pillow from the third floor had fallen down almost on this woman's head. Why? Because my mother every day would take the pillowcase, pillows and the bedding and put it on the windowsill to air it. No? Make it feel like it's fresh. And one of the pillows fell down. And it was especially quite heavy. So it could have injured her, this lady. It didn't, but frightened her. And my father was saying to her, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, of course. I'll tell my wife not to do this anymore. Please forgive me. Thank you for giving me the pillow." And he came up, and he was so angry. He yelled at my mother, and really, I had never seen him so upset. Why? Because inside that specific pillow was a huge amount of money sewn into the pillow. I don't know how much, and I don't think she knew, my mother. But she never again put that pillow on the windowsill. Go ahead and try ask more that I can tell you more.
Come December, how did you prepare for leaving Fort Theresienstadt?
Well, I didn't prepare, that's for sure, because I was a little kid. So it was my mother alone was doing all of that, because my grandmother was dead, my grandfather and my father were gone, so it was just her and me. So she must have packed everything and put everything together. And then we went to the train station. And if you can imagine the train station, this is December. Very cold in Czechoslovakia in December. And the train station in my mind was huge, but it really probably wasn't. It wasn't so big. But about 200 or so children and mothers, maybe grandmothers, were all parked on the floor, cold floor, with blankets and suitcases, and everybody pushing for a little space. And people are human. No, this is my space. I was here first. No, push over a little bit. Give me a little. That kind of. I was terrible, and there were no food was given. Whatever people brought along with them from home, they had bread, sandwich, an apple, a pear, whatever. And there were no toilet. There were 2 toilets for around 200, 300 people with children. It was horrific. And we stayed there 2 nights till the train arrived. And then they put us on the train. And I remember that it was not it was a regular train for people, but instead of 4 people in a cabin, there were 6, 8, 10 people, children, crying, hungry, thirsty. It was horrific. I remember, I think I cried all the time. And then we arrived about 3-4 hours later. It was a long ride. I don't know why it took so long. And we got off with our stuff. And I remember walking. Now why walking? Because the railway line finished about 3 kilometers before Theresienstadt. There wasn't a rail line that led right to the camp. It finished in a place called Bohuševice. about 3 kilometers south of Terezin. And from there we got off, and imagine 200 people with kids and a few men, but very few, were along too. And my mother, I remember my mother with a knapsack and a couple of suitcases she was carrying, and I also had a suitcase and also a knapsack, and but this suitcase was so heavy and I could hardly walk. Every time she would look back and see if I'm still there. I was still there. And then one man who was near me, I guess he had a light suitcase, and he said, I'll help you. And he helped me. And we walked for about 2 hours, 3 kilometers. And when we got close to the concentration camp, to Terezin, one woman called out, and you have to remember, German guards were walking alongside of us. And one woman called out, "No, when do we see our men, our husbands, our fathers?" And one German soldier said, "Morgen früh um 6 Uhr taucht ihr aus von den Zimmer, ihr werdet sehen, dass die Männer gehen zur Arbeit. 6 Uhr in der Früh, schaut ihr aus von den Fenstern." Which means, tomorrow morning at 6 in the morning, look out from your windows and you'll see the men marching to work. And we were, okay. So the next morning, I remember we arrived at the camp and they put us into one of the barracks on the 3rd floor. And we were about 10, 12 people in one little room and triple beds, what do you call it? Bunk beds. 2 high, 3 high, I'm not sure, 3 high I think it was. And I was on top. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, us kids, there were about 5 kids in our room. Terribly crowded, terribly noisy, no privacy, nothing. And 6 o'clock in the morning, we ran to the window. It was a little window, and we looked out, and and we saw the men marching, and the German guards marching aside, and they were marching to work, 5 in a row, 10 rows. And I saw my father, and I called out, "Papa, Papa, Ernst, Ernst." And he didn't look up, because somebody had looked up and the Germans went and hit him with the rifle butt. So he was afraid, but I saw him. But I didn't see my grandpa. Why did I say? I asked my mother, where's my grandpa? She said, "Ich weiß nicht, I don't know. Living. I don't know." Turns out, we found out later, he was ill and that he was in a sick room. And I actually never saw my grandpa again. Never.
How old were you at this point?
I was almost 6. I was born in 1935 in March. The transport was in December. So December, you have December, January, February, March. So I wasn't even 6 years old yet.
December of what year?
41. So my 6th birthday was in the concentration camp already.
What was your first impression when you walked into the camp?
I was tired. I was hungry. I was distraught. I was just frightened and unable to comprehend what, why, and how is this happening to me and all of us. There was nobody who could explain to me. There was no reason, logical reason, sensible reason why this is happening. And I just felt that I don't know. At that point, I wasn't sure if I was hopeful or that took time to express itself in me. We were put into a barracks that was set up just for mothers and children, little children, from 0 to 10. All the children were separated from their mothers and put into groups in private housing. That this was sort of a combination, and it still is to this day almost, of an army camp and a private and a village, a regular village, with stores and private housing and farmers and regular people. Non-Jews were living there. The Germans removed them, and when they removed them, they set up for the older kids, put them separate from their parents. Men were separate from women. Women and small children were separate from the men. Elderly people were separated from others, and they had it the worst. There were anything between 8 to 10 different barracks like that in this place called Theresienstadt, with barbed wire fence around and guards, sometimes Czech guards, sometimes German guards, but the Germans were in charge. The Nazis, the SS, they ruled, and they appointed the Jewish elders as if they are running the camp. And they did, but according to the dictates of the Germans, all throughout the 4 years.
What did you mean when you said that the elderly had it the worst?
Well, because the elderly couldn't work, they needed the least nutrition. And their rations were just barely enough to keep them alive. And they were sick, and they were crowded, and they had no privacy, and they were many times helpless, didn't understand what's happening. Then the Jewish elders tried to help them too, but the Germans said, "You want to give them more food? Give them more food. Take it away from the women that are with children, or take it away from the men that go to work. That's what we have. That's what you get." So they suffered, and I have a personal story to tell here. My great-grandmother, my grandfather's mother, her name was Rosa Samish, arrived in Terezin 1943, 2 years after we had arrived. And of course, because she was 83 years old, she was put together in one of the barracks with all the other elderly people. And she, having been a middle-class lady who used to showers and clean towels and sheets and very, what we call in German, gepflegt, very, proper and clean and for her it must have been hell. I remember my mother coming back from seeing her, and she was just beside herself. And then one day this great-grandmother Rosa said to my mother, "Oh, they're sending me to the east." They're sending you to the east? This is about 2 or 3 months after she had arrived in Terezin. Yes, they're sending a whole bunch of us to the east. And we knew in Terezin that the east meant we didn't know about the shootings and the gas chambers. We really didn't know. We heard rumors, but there were many rumors. But we knew it would be very bad there. Nobody. The fear of being sent east was a fear that affected anything and everybody. Every day, every moment, all the time. The fear of being sent east. People knew it would be bad. So when my great-grandmother said to my mother, "They're sending me tomorrow to the east," my mother said, "Oh my God, how is she going to survive, this poor lady?" And I remember, and this I remember specifically, we went to the railroad track. By that time, they had extended the railroad track from Bolshevice to Terezin. Of course, the Jews had laid the extension. And it wasn't actually a Bahnhof, a train station. It was just the end of the line. It's still there today. You can even see it. There's a little building there. Maybe that was a guardhouse. It still exists there too. And my mother took me and we went to say goodbye to her. And she was standing a little bit off to the side. And she saw that my mother was close to tears and worried. And my great-grandmother says to my mother, "Ach, hab keine Angst. Was willst du? Was können die machen mit mir? Ich bin doch ein altes Weib. Ich kann doch nicht mal eben arbeiten." Which translated means, "Oh, why are you so worried? What are you worried? What can they do with me? I'm an old lady. I can't even work." Little did she know that was a death sentence. Because to keep people alive when they can't even work, they were the first people to be gassed. Useless. And so it happened. And just imagine an 83-year-old lady, refined. I remember even she wore this long black dress, which must have been the last thing that she had was clean. And getting on the train, and by that time the trains weren't trains for people, they were trains for beasts, for cows, for sheep. And then arriving in Treblinka, she was sent to Treblinka, which was, as we know now, only a death camp, nothing more, and told to undress. An 83-year-old lady told to undress, and then she was shaven because the Germans wanted to use the hair for their German soldiers to make, I don't know, gloves for the freezing Germans on the Eastern Front. And then they were told, now you're going to take a shower. And they were all herded towards the shower. And probably, I imagine my grandmother say, oh, finally, I'm going to be clean. After months of not being able to wash while she was interrogating, oh, now I'm going to be clean, sauber sein. But it wasn't to be. These weren't showers. These were gas chambers. I find it so inhuman, so horrific that I don't have the right words to express it. The cruelty and the inhumanity of such behavior of other human beings to other human beings.
Was anyone else in your family sent away to the east?
Yes, all of them. Every one of them was sent to the east. There are probably more than 26, because turns out, and this I found out much later, that my grandmother, my mother's mother, who was sent to Vienna, had 5 siblings. And only 1 out of the 5 survived the war. They all ended up in various places. And my grandmother, at a certain point, we know we have, once again, documentation, she was sent to Izbeka in southeastern Poland. And there, the entire village was murdered in cold blood. Nobody survived, including, of course, her. And so did her 2 sisters or 3 sisters, and her brother who committed suicide in Vienna together with his wife. And only 1 sister survived. And I actually met her. And she actually came and visited us in Canada, in Toronto, after the war. And once again, a regret. I was a kid. I was 11, 12 years old. No, I was Canada, I was already 14, 15 years old. She could have told us, or told me, many things about my grandmother. But I was living my life, trying to rebuild my life. And I didn't ask, and I didn't pay attention, I didn't care, didn't want to hear about the suffering. A pity I would know a lot more of what really happened to my grandmother. And what happened to her, not only during the war, but what happened to her when she was divorced by my grandfather. Why? How?
What did your day-to-day look like in Terezin?
It's a good question. Everybody wants to know that. Well, you see, Terezin was a very strange concentration camp. And by the way, they call it Terezin Ghetto. And it was not a ghetto. I don't accept that description, because ghetto was only a certain area in existing towns and cities, where they took a certain area, most of the time where most of the Jews lived, fenced it off, or built walls around it, and that made it a ghetto within, let's say, Warsaw, or other places. But this was a concentration camp. But it was a concentration camp that the Germans used as a means of showing that, oh, look, we are resettling the Jews. The Red Cross came. They took an area and beautified it. Set up stores where they sold clothing that they had taken from the newly arrived Jews, and put it on shelves, and they printed fake money that had the same value as those people who play Monopoly, as you buy for 100 another hotel, that kind of game we have in Monopoly. This is Monopoly money. It had no value except in the camp. During the time when the Red Cross, mostly the Danish Red Cross, came. Once or twice. They even took us kids from our barracks and in trucks, brought us to a central park, sort of a playground, and tell us, here, play. You have a day of playing. And what could we do? We played. There were swings there, and we got a little ball to play. But as soon, and the Red Cross would stand 100, 200 meters away and photograph and show the world, oh, look how the Jews are being, they can buy things, they have food, they have playgrounds for the kids. Oh, utopia for the Jews, resettlement. But it was all bluff. It was all, the Germans were very good at it. And the Jews were told did what the Germans told them. Because the day or 2 days after, all the people that took part in this bluff were sent to the east. And most of them died. Theresienstadt was also a place where there were plays and concerts, sometimes on such a high level that some of the German officers went to listen to the concerts. The problem was, the day after, or the week after, or the month after, the players, the actors, were sent to the east. And there was the end of the concert and the end of the play. And people ask, so how were the people that were doing the acting and the playing and the performances able to do that? Because their approach was as long as we are creating music, culture, painting, we are alive. We exist. Will we live tomorrow, the day after? We're not sure. Probably. Probably not. But today, I'm performing, I'm playing the violin, getting out beautiful sounds, because I'm good. I'm alive. And why not get satisfaction and joy out of that? And that's exactly what happened. They did. And I, as a kid, living with my mother at 6 o'clock in the morning would be going out to work in a factory with other women working for the German war program. She was actually splitting mica. It's called mica. It's a kind of stone that if you split it thin, it's used for insulation in electronic equipment. With a thin knife she had to split. Would sit there 10 hours, 12 hours doing that. And the Germans from time to time would check if each woman did enough. If they did enough, according to what they decided is considered enough, she stayed. She stayed. If she had a son or daughter or more, they stayed too. And I guess my mother did work well. She didn't even realize, I'm sure, that this was her lifesaver and mine. So I existed. During the day, I'm not sure I knew what I was doing. Us kids that lived together with the mother, the little kids, somehow trying to find ways of finding food because we were hungry. Morning, night, and day. The little piece of bread, and from time to time a little marmalade, and a little margarine, and a bowl of very thin soup made of potatoes and kohlrabi, with very little potatoes and kohlrabi in it. This is what we existed. So I tried to find over some kind of work, because that gave me maybe a chance to steal. And I remember, for example, one time we were unloading loaves of bread. A truck would come to the barracks, drive inside the yard, and there was a storage room, and somebody had to unload the bread from the truck. And I remember a few of us kids running to the truck and volunteering to unload. And I remember on my arms like that, 6, 7, 8 breads, taking on my arms and bringing it from the truck to the storage, in hope that maybe I can break a little piece of bread from one of them, or finding something. But one day I remember we finished unloading, and some kids saw in the corner barrels, wooden barrels, like beer barrels. We didn't know what they were. We ran over there and we saw, oh, there had been some marmalade or jam inside. So we figured out somehow some cardboard or something we found, and we scraped the inside so that when we got the bread in the evening, we could put a little bit of jam or marmalade on the bread. And that's how we existed. That's how we managed. I remember at night, the Germans had brought a pretty big, at least in my eyes, load of potatoes. Half of them were rotten, but still there were potatoes. And the Germans posted posted guards around the pile it was pretty big, and the German guards, 2 or 3 guards that would march from here to here, turn around and move back. And this one would march from here to here, turn around and back. And it's about 2 or 3 guards. And I remember a couple of kids together with me came with little suitcases, old suitcases, and we watched and waited. And each one of us said, when he goes from here to here, when he's halfway there, we can sneak up, grab a few potatoes into our suitcase and run so that before he turned around, because they marched very stiffly, like Germans do. and that's how I existed. That's how I remember trying to find ways of doing something, and that way getting some more food to survive. I sort of recall some kind of deep desire to survive.
Were you ever called? You were just talking about you and the rest of the kids stealing potatoes and spending your days looking for food. Were you or any of the kids at any point caught?
Sorry. No. At least I don't know of any court. I'm sure. Okay, I actually can say, as far as food is concerned, as far as they called it in Theresienstadt, Schleißen. They didn't call it stealing, called it Schleißen, taking something from some place, from someone, of course. So, it was sort of an accepted way of surviving. People understood that. But if you were caught, you never saw it were seen again. But I don't think they were. But to bring back a little bit something, at the very beginning, in the first few months, one of the things that the Germans did is they printed out a postcard with a place for the address to send her, and you signed your name, and it had already printed, sort of written out, "We are fine, everything's okay, be well, ta 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 ta." Of course, it was a total lie. Nobody was fine. Everybody was under stress and frightened and debilitated and humiliated and isolated in the concentration camp. But there were a few young men who dared to write their own letter and smuggle it out. And the Germans somehow caught them, or caught the ones who were enabling this to happen, in order to prevent any future such action by the Jews. They took 16 young guys, tortured them, and then hung them in public. And I remember, and this was in the first few months of the existence of the camp, I remember my mother taking me down to the central yard. The Germans had put up a stage with the hanging ropes, and they hung 8 young men, maybe 19, 20 years old. And I remember my mother taking my head and pushing it to the side so I wouldn't see when they pulled the rope. So that's my answer to were kids caught? No, but at the beginning, when they caught those guys that tried, all they did is wanted to send a letter saying that, you know, it's horrific, paid with their death. And we heard them being tortured. I remember the yelling in the same barracks that I was in, which was called Dresden. Every barracks had a name of a German city. This was Dresden. They had an underground bunker, something, torture place. And the way that Germans tortured, they smoked cigarette, and then burning cigarette, they made holes in the bodies of the man, so that any information that they had, who enabled you, who was the policeman or the guard or who transferred the letter outside, were caught and murdered.
Were there other public executions that happened later?
No, as far as I know, no. There were only 2 public executions, and they were at the beginning, and I don't remember any other executions. People who were caught doing something as if against the rules, they were punished in other ways. Sometimes they were simply shot on the spot, or they were tortured, or they were sent. There was a attached prison, which had been a political prison even before the establishment of the concentration camp. And if the Jews that were sent there didn't survive. So, but the biggest punishment was being sent east. That's it. All the 3 main elders who were the sort of the heads of the Jewish self-governing unit were either gassed or shot. Not because they did something wrong, but because they were the leaders.
At what point in your stay in the camp were they killed?
I don't remember, no. But different elders were murdered at different times. They changed. Not necessarily were they murdered because they did something wrong, but sometimes just they always, the elders, the Eldenrat was called, they performed the tasks that the Germans ordered them to perform. They had a certain amount of maneuverability to make. If the Germans told them in 2 days at 8 o'clock in the morning, we want 1,000 people on this transport to the east, and the Germans, but not from this group or that group or that group that are working or mining or that. Take it from where you want. That's what we want. So the elders between them had to maneuver who yes, who no, why, and then all kinds of struggles and and tremendous lot of tension. Now, I didn't know about this because I was a kid. My tension was survive, somehow survive. I even worked, for example, cleaning and taking care of horses for the German officers. Now, why? Because I loved the German officers? No, because there was a little chance that maybe if I do a good job, he would let me have an apple, leave it on the windowsill in the barn where the horses were, or something, a piece of bread maybe. You know, there was many opportunities that you, if you didn't go after it, you didn't even know. And that was my way of trying to survive.
What did the Germans use the horses for?
God, go around, show them that they're the bosses, they're in charge. They didn't have many horses. I think about, as far as I remember, half a dozen. But they also had to be taken care of, even half a dozen. And if a kid didn't do a good job, he got kicked in the ass and finished his work there. But if you did, and sometimes here and there you saw an inkling of humanity in some of these Germans. A little bit, here and there. It did happen. There were such people. Not too many, but there were.
The people who were killed in the camp, did you know what they did with the bodies?
First of all, mostly I think people weren't killed. Mostly people died. They died of hunger, of sickness, of exhaustion, of malnutrition, and they were picked up every day on some kind of a wagon and, as far as I know, buried. I really don't know. I want to say more clearly, but I really don't know. But there was also a furnace, what do you call it, a crematoria, that was built outside of the camp, and there people that died were in. And at one point, the Germans, in the later part of the war, the Germans took 20,000 urns of people and threw them into the river because they wanted to get rid of the evidence of how many people died.
Did the camp have access to this river?
No, not open access. It was all controlled by the Germans.
Were you able to have clean water?
We had water, yes.
Where would you go to get food and water in the camp?
Well, as far as food is concerned, it was given out, I believe, once a day in each barracks, maybe in a couple of places in the barracks, depending how many people were and how many kitchens there were. Each barracks had its own kitchen, sometimes maybe even more than one. And I really don't know. And as far as water is concerned, I don't recall not having water.
What was the hygiene situation?
It was terrible. It was terrible. It wasn't only terrible in the places like the elderly who were crowded and sick and a terrible, terrible state, but also in all the other barracks where the men and the women they were separate. The hygiene was terrible. There were latrines. Do you know what a latrine is? I don't know if you know. We had it actually here in Israel. It reminds me of when I first went into the army here in Camp 80 near Pardes Chana. The latrines were sort of a building with in the center sort of a seating place with holes, and you sat. Maybe 10 people at the same time could relieve themselves. But it was smelly and not clean. Even here it was terrible. There it was 10 times worse. 10 times worse. And even though there were people who were supposed to clean it and keep it, but it was so, at times it was so crowded. It's unthinkable. It was just too many people in too small a space. I mean, just imagine living in a room like this with another 12 other people. A bed here, a bed here, bed here, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and the suitcases, and the bank, and the kids, and the noise, and little kids, pee-pee, kaki, and it was very, very hard.
Were there new babies born in the camp?
Yes. Yes, there were. How many? I don't know. How many of them survived? I don't know. All I can say as far as that is concerned, survival, for example, is that something like 15,000 children and young people, meaning from 0 to, let's say, 17, 18, were or went through Theresienstadt. In other words, kids 8, 10, 12, 14 come and then been sent to the east. Out of those 15,000, approximately between 90 and 100 and something, 110, 105, survived, came back alive. Not only those that survived physically in the camp itself, but survived after having been sent, let's say, to Auschwitz or Buchenwald or Dachau or wherever. Approximately 100. There's a big discussion and argument going on how many really did survive. The accepted numbers is something between 90 and 105. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure that anybody can be 100% sure, because the Germans were very organized, but in between all this organization, there was a lot of also disorganization, and horrific mistakes were made, and they were not documented. And I can give an example, for example, of the camp of Treblinka. When it was first set up, It was never a work camp. You see, other camps were usually a combination of both work, slave labor camps, and death camps, either by shooting or by gassing in one form or another. But Treblinka was only a death camp. And the first German commander there must have been a real asshole, because he was very bad at organizing it. But at a certain point, the corpses, dead people were all over the place, and there was smell, and he managed to bury them and burn them, so that the Germans removed him and appointed somebody who made order. But making order also meant that the gassing of the Jews went chick-chack, as we say in Hebrew, went very organized. 150 now, 150 another an hour and a half, 200, you know. So it's not that all went smoothly all the time.
Going back to Terezin, how often did new inmates come to the camp?
Oh, that's very, very hard to tell. There was no regular every 2 days, every 2 weeks, every 3 months. It depended on who knows what it depended on. I have no idea of knowing, know how. Who decided, when decided, why. And sometimes it probably was totally disorganized. As organized as the Germans are, they were very often not so organized. Or maybe there was a bombing of a railway. If the Allies had really wanted to slow down the killing of the Jews, they could have destroyed the railway system of Germany. Why they didn't do it, I don't know. I don't know. And I'm not sure that there's somebody who does know. It would have prevented it, but it could have slowed down. And slowing down means that maybe a few more thousand people would be alive. And not even only Jews, also non-Jews.
Were there non-Jews in the camp?
I don't think so. In our camp, I don't think so. Our camp, my camp, I don't think so. I think that there were Jews from all over. First of all, Czechoslovakia, and then from Poland, Austria, Hungary, from all over. Holland, Denmark. From Denmark were the last. The reason that the Red Cross came was because the Danish insisted that their Jewish citizens, if they're going to be sent to this concentration, they want to see how they're being treated. It was the Danes who initiated it. But it was also a bluff.
Were there any Jewish inmates that helped the guards?
It's a hard question for me to ask. First of all, because I was a kid, so how would I know? But I imagine very, very, very reasonably that there must have been some who, in one way or another, did the Germans work for them. Willingly, unwillingly, hopefully that would save them. I think there were in many cases, I'm sure there were some, and I'm not sure at all that in the end they survived because of that. Probably they didn't.
Were there any inmates that helped you or your mom specifically?
None. None that I can. No, I'm wrong to say that. Our family doctor, who was actually my birth doctor in Karlovy Vary, also ended up in the concentration camp in Theresienstadt. And he worked in the sick room, like a infirmary, let's call it. Let's not call it a hospital. Infirmary for sick people. And my mother got an infection above her breast, left breast, up here. And he operated on her, opened it up and cleaned it out. And because she was in the sick room, very often the Germans said, empty the sick room, or take 50 people from the sick room and send them on the next transport. So I don't know who decided, how it was decided, who would be the people to be sent to their death. But according to what I remember my mother saying, that at least twice, if not more, my mother ended up on the list, and this doctor, our family doctor, removed her from the list. So yes, he did help. Of course, somebody else paid with their life for this help.
Did you have any traditions that you kept while in the camp?
Any traditions that
you kept while in the camp?
Not that I recall, no. I don't think so. I don't think we kept any traditions. My mother wasn't in that frame of mind, in that area enough to say, oh, but we have to celebrate Hanukkah. But there were people who did. I remember here and there seeing on Hanukkah a couple of candles being lit. But essentially, no. She was not.
How much contact did you have with the outside world from the camp?
None. None. There was no contact with the outside world, as far as I know. There was some contact, I'm sure, by some people, but not me, not my mother. Even contact with family members that had come and been in Theresienstadt and went on to the east was very restricted, extremely restricted. And I don't even recall, even though I know from documentation that they all were there. They all went from Prague to Terezin, and from Terezin to Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Treblinka, Warsaw, wherever. But I don't remember seeing them once. Maybe my mother did. If she was here, I would ask her today. We have to remember something here that you didn't ask about. After the war, once I realized, or we realized, that our family was finished and that even my father didn't survive, I didn't dwell or deal about all these memories. I dealt and concentrated on now, today, tomorrow. Meaning, on going to school, on making friends, on building a future, on being caught up in the dream of a Jewish nation. And I put all my energy, all my talents, all my determination into that part of my life. And as far as I know, many people like me didn't talk about their experiences or deal with them at all. Neither did I. Neither did I. And sometimes, looking back, I should have, I could have, I should have, and I would feel more knowledgeable, specifically about my family. You know, in general, we all know thousands, millions of people were tortured, killed, burned to death, whatever. But the specifics of your own family, your own aunts, uncles, grandmothers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers, that's a difficult thing to deal with and to try. And I had a few opportunities and I didn't take them, and I'm sorry that I didn't.
Are there any more key memories from Theresienstadt that you haven't gotten to share yet you would like to?
Key memories of Theresienstadt. Yeah, I would say, I think one key memory is of being liberated by the Red Army. I think, certainly think, you see, for days before the liberation, the Americans were bombing Germany. And as they were bombing Germany, sometimes they flew way up high in huge formations over Terezin. And we knew, by then we knew, that the Germans were losing the war. And we knew that the Americans were bombing Germany. And every time that happened, at least some of us would run down into the road next to where we were being kept, and show our joy and yell, "Wow, wow, Americans!" Clap our hands. Of course, the minute the Germans saw or heard it, they would come and start shooting at us. But we ran away. Nobody got killed. We ran and hid. But we knew that things were changing and happening. Also, we noticed that less and less German guards were present. At a certain point, there were a lot of them, but then less and less. Sometimes we thought, well, because they were sending them to the front. But many times we saw, instead of 10, there were just 5 there. Well, who knows? Who cares? We were still there, the prisoners. So when finally, on May, I think it was May 5th, 6th, or 7th, I don't know, all of a sudden we heard the rumblings and the yells of our Jews in one of the barracks that was alongside the main road leading to Prague, yelling, "The Americans are coming! No, the British! The English! No, the Russians!" Turns out it was the Russians. And the road was leading to Prague because they were on the way to Prague to help out against in the uprising of the Czechs against the Germans in Prague. Because the Germans in Prague at the end of the war were destroying some of the finest historical buildings, and the Czechs took up arms and fought them, but they were losing. So the Russians were running. So when they went by our concentration camp, people, ran down and broke down the barbed wire fence, and the Russians, once they heard that we are Jews and concentration camp, they threw us cigarettes and candies and chocolate, and we kept on going. And they told us, we have to keep on going, but we will help you soon. And that's true. And after a while, they sent a contingent of the Red Army. Actually, it was a Ukrainian company that was mounted on horses. And once they didn't need the horses anymore there, so they freed the horses. And I remember as kids going to this central park and catching the horses and riding them bareback. We had fun, and it was exhilarating to feel that you don't have to be afraid to be shot or sent to the east or whatever, tortured. It was, even for me, I was 10 years old. It was hard to explain.
Do you remember where you were when you learned you had been liberated?
Yeah, I was right there in the building where I had been. And we watched from the windows, and then we ran downstairs, and my mother yelled after me, "Be careful, don't go, come back. I didn't listen to her for once. And I went and I watched, and I was just full of joy, I guess. And it's hard even to say how one feels when you're in prison for 4 or 5 years, and all of a sudden you feel free. What does it mean? Are you going to be able to eat more? Are you going to take a walk, not to be afraid, not to wear your star anymore, not to be humiliated, beaten, whatever?
What was your physical state at this point?
I was weak. I was schwach, they say in German. I was undernourished. I was very thin, but I was alive. And that counted for a lot.
Did the Ukrainians come with food?
The Ukrainians, I don't know if the Ukrainians come, but they brought food. Yes, the Russians did supply us with some food. I don't recall what it was, how much it was, but it was much better than what we had gotten. And it took a while to get things organized. And then the Red Cross came, and there was a typhoid epidemic. So they had to isolate us and separate us, and there was quarantine. It was no easy time. And I remember also after the war that the few kids that were still alive there in Theresienstadt, about my age, or maybe a little older or even younger, they took us, and for 10 days or something like that, they took us to these famous mansions outside in the country that the Germans had used for their generals and for their officers, which had once been not actually Jewish, but had been maybe Czech royalty places. And I remember going to one for something like 10 days, and there being fed and being treated and trying to build up our physical and maybe even to some extent our mental, social state. And I remember they're warning us not to go alone into the woods because the Germans had thrown away some of their hand grenades and done it so that if somebody touched it, it would explode. And it happened once or twice that kids did get killed because they picked it up and that was the end of them. But yes, this did happen. We were in this kind of a thing. And I actually can tell you that even in this situation, we were in you can imagine a long hall and beds nicely set up, clean sheets for the first time, and there were showers and 15, 20 kids sleeping. Mostly all we were the same age, around 9, 10, 8, maybe a couple were 6, 11. But I remember one kid, and this will maybe shock you a little bit, who at night in the evening would abuse us sexually. And we were afraid. We didn't know anything about it. But we heard cries. I heard cries. He didn't get to me. So, but then my mother and I returned to Prague, waited to see if anybody comes back. Nobody did. Somebody told my mother that they had seen my father on the death march, and he died on the death march. But there were no proof, we had no proof, nothing. It was just somebody who said they saw him. But we were never totally sure. We waited for a while. Nobody from the family came back. So we returned to Karlovy Vary, and we started life anew. My mother and I, we rented a little apartment, and I went to school, and I started going to some kind of a youth club. Dror Halutz Tzayir, Zionist Youth Organization. I and a couple of other kids were the youngest. All the rest were either 15 or 20 or 25. But we were about 10, 15. And we started talking about Palestine and kibbutz and having our own country. And to me, that sounded hopeful. And I linked into it. I really felt, why shouldn't we have our own country? And I went to the meetings and I learned a few folk dances and went to summer camp. And this is funny, at one of the summer camps, we had, and this was up in the mountains called Krkonoše mountains. That's on the border of Germany and Czechoslovakia. We had a summer camp, and of course, summer camp you have 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and there's a Parents' Day. On Parents' Day, parents come and see the kids that they hadn't seen for 10 days. And what do? You organize performances, folk dancing, some singing, some, who knows, somersaults, all kinds. And the emissary that was in charge said, Gideon, but my name wasn't Gideon. My name was Peter. Peter, I want you to, you have a nice voice. I want you to learn a song and sing it for Parents' Day. I sing a Hebrew, so I don't know Hebrew. I'll teach you, don't worry. Okay, what's the song? He taught me Ba Menucha Le'agea, which is called the song of the Jezreel Valley. And I didn't know what I was singing about, but he taught me and I sang it. The funny part was that 11, 12 years later, I ended up in the Jezreel Valley in Kibbutz Hazoreah, and the very song that I was singing for the Parents' Day in 46, 47 in Czechoslovakia, I lived in when I arrived in 1959 in Kibbutz Hazoreah. And it's a famous song, and it has many verses, and I know it to this very day. And I can sing it, a couple, little piece of it. I'll do it. Ba menucha le'agea, u'margoa le'amel, לילה חיוור משתרע, על שדות עמק יזרעאל, טל מלמטה ולבנה מעל, and it goes on. I will keep you singing, but I love the song. And when I first arrived in 1959 and learned that this is the Jezreel Valley, as we were driving on a truck from the port of Haifa to the kibbutz, I said, wow, it has taken a long time, but here I am, finally at home.
Oh, thank you for the song. That was beautiful. Going back just to follow the timeline of how you made it to Israel. So do you remember the date of when you and your mom returned to Prague?
The exact date, no. But I don't think that's important. Mm-hmm. It was after the war. We were freed. Let's put it together approximately. The war finished in May. We were freed by the Russians in May. A couple of weeks, let's say 2-3 weeks, I went to this recuperation place. Then we came back. Then we went to Prague. I would say we probably stayed in Prague for a couple of months. So we have May, we have June, but I think by July we were back in Karlovy Vary. And then I started going to draw and thinking and dreaming of a Jewish nation and going, and the communists took over the rule of Czechoslovakia. Then we got a notice from a great aunt living in Brooklyn that she would like us to come to America. And the Americans at that time had a quota for a number of refugees that could come from Czechoslovakia to America, but only if they had a relative or someone who would guarantee them, be their backup in America. And my great aunt signed an affidavit that she was take responsibility. And so we got a number, 1,389. And when our number would come up, we would be informed that we can come. So this was in 1946. 47 went by. 48 started, and we didn't hear. And I was, by that time, Israel was born, And I remember going to camp and learning how to use a stick, because Israel didn't have arms, stick to defend. It was really crazy. And then my mother received a notification. We can come to America. We have the number. So we traveled to Prague and got our passport, and I even have the passport still here. And lo and behold, on the beginning of June 1948, we traveled by train to France, to the port of Le Havre. It's a big port. Got on the boat, the SS America. It was the Queen of the United States Lines. And for 7 days, we traveled on a beautiful boat that even had a swimming pool, where I learned how to swim against my mother's wishes, and arrived in the port of New York. There's a Statue of Liberty in the background that I was very disappointed with because it looked so small. But it was small because we were so far away, not because it was small. And my cousin and my great aunt received us in the port of New York, and we started a new life in the Goldene Medina, the golden country called United States of America. And I didn't know English except for one song that I knew, that I had learned at a couple of English lessons that I took before we left Karlovy Vary. My bunny lies over the ocean, my bunny lies over the sea, my bunny lies over the ocean, oh, bring back my bunny to me, da da da. Anyway, that was my English, total English. And of course I was lost. It was June, and I didn't know the language. And I didn't have friends. And I saw kids playing stickball in the street. We lived on East 21st Street, Brooklyn. And everybody in that area was Jewish. It was like a ghetto of Jews. It wasn't a ghetto because there were no fences, but all Jews. Even the Shushan boy was Jewish. But slowly, I learned a little bit. I heard. I went to the park. Prospect Park was right near there, and I watched kids playing all kinds of games. I didn't know, baseball, hitting a ball with a stick. My God, what kind of game is that? And then I saw kids playing football and throwing a ball in the shape of a pregnant banana. I didn't know this either. But then one day I came there, and because it was within easy walking distance, and I saw kids playing soccer, which is football, our football, European football. And I stood behind the goal, and every time they missed the goal, I ran, kicked the ball back. And after about 15, 20 minutes, the kids playing there said, "Hey, you know how to play, huh? See, you kick." Yeah. I didn't speak English. Ah, you're Jewish? Yeah, Yasem Jid. Yeah, oh, come play with us. So they invited me to play. After half an hour playing, we played, and I was so happy. Oh, finally, I'm playing a game. The kids, they said, somehow they managed to explain to me that they have a club on Friday evenings, and I should come, and we sing, and we dance. We have Onek Shabbat. I hardly knew what they were talking about. A little bit I understood. And well enough, I went home, and I was all excited. And I told my mother, so, "No, you're not going out in the evening." She was very strict. She was very hard woman to be with. And my cousin, not the great aunt, but the cousin who was living there, who was taking extra care of her, said, no, her name was Leonie, said, no, Doris, you can let him go, but he has to be home by 10 o'clock. Just tell him he has to be home. It's not far from here. I'll take him the first time, and then he'll know how to get home. So she agreed. Ah, and here I am, again in a Zionist youth organization that wants to go to Israel. Not the same exactly, but it sounded all the same to me. And I learned. I started singing the songs and learning the folk dances, and I loved the folk dances. In the end, I became a folk dance teacher, actually, for many years. It's my main hobby. And 10 years, 11 years later, I ended up in Kibbutz Hazorea, Israel, as a result of that.
What work did your mother do in America?
The work that my mother did is what she actually had learned in millinery school. Because when, I'm jumping back a little bit, because when my mother stayed with her father after the First World War, 1918-19, she was being raised by her stepmother, and they had a son 2 years later, and she loved her son. But according to my mother, her stepmother, once she was married to her father, was not so kind to her. And yet my mother felt very close to her stepbrother. But for whatever reason, which we will never know, at the age of 17 or 18, she was sent to a millinery school in Prague. And she became a professional milliner. So years later, even in Prague, when they had escaped Karlovy Vary, where the Germans took over, I remind you that we said that she worked on making beautiful hats, and I sat next to her making clothing for dolls. She taught me how to sew. I still know how to sew. Even my son knows how to sew, one of them. The fact is, that's the profession she had, that's the profession she did. I think she also worked in New York during the year that we were there. But then when we moved to Canada, so that she could marry a man who couldn't get into the United States, but could get into Canada from Czechoslovakia, she got a job right away because she was really a very good milliner. And she had a nice and a good paying job. And that's what she was all her life.
When did you move to Canada?
Well, we moved a year after we arrived in New York. So we arrived in New York in 1948 in June. And I went to night school, and then I went to regular school. I went to grade 6. I should have been grade 7, but I went to grade 6 because I was behind. And then a year later, I think in July of 1949, we moved to Toronto, Canada. We lived on a street called College Street, which was also a very Jewish neighborhood at that time, even though the Italians were slowly taking over. They were newly arrived Italians. And I joined Hashomer HaTzair, the Zionist Youth Organization. I went to school, grade 8. My English teacher was Miss Bickham, who demanded for me to learn English poetry and to write to learn English grammar, which I found very difficult. And life started anew.
Did you like it in Canada?
I did. I actually did. And I also very quickly made friends with one other. He wasn't actually a Holocaust survivor, but he was Jewish and he did survive in hiding in Slovakia. He was from Slovakia. We became very good friends. And the fact is, we are friends to this very day. And he should have been living in Israel, but he never made it to Israel for ridiculous reasons. But we are friends to this very day. And he was a professor at Boston University in chemistry.
Can you tell me the story of how you got your new name?
Oh, the story of my name. The story of my name is a good story because having the name of Peter Wolfgang Lev was definitely not a Jewish name in any way or form. I mean, we know Peter and Paul, right? So one day, while I was in part of HaShomer HaTzayir, the Zionist Youth Organization, the Shaliach, the emissary, who was sort of an advisor and organizer of this nest of the Zionist Youth Organization in Toronto, Canada, his name was Harash, and he came from Kibbutz Dalia, which is still in existence, and the Ramot Menashe hills here in Israel. He said, you know, Peter, this is not a Jewish name. We have to give you a Jewish name if you're going to come to Israel, which I'm sure you are, right? Sure I am. Well, I was so sure. And I said, let's try, how about Avraham? Avraham is a nice Jewish name. I said, okay. So he told everybody, there's no more Peter, there's Avraham. But the kids and the people in our group didn't catch on. Avraham didn't catch on. He went back to Harash. Said, Harash, this is nobody's calling me Avraham. Everybody's calling me Peter. I said, okay, you know what? I have an idea. I have a much nicer name. We'll call you Gideon. Gideon was a very famous general and leader in past history. It's a good name, strong. Let's try it. I said, okay, Gideon. And Gideon called on. Then I asked Harash, are there many Gideons in Israel? And he said, no, hardly any. I don't know any. I said, okay, well, 10 years later, when I arrived in 1959 in Israel on Kibbutz Azorea, guess what? There were at least another 3 Gideons already on the kibbutz, and I was the 4th one, and the youngest one of all of them. But to this day, I am Gideon, and I officially changed my name to Gideon Lev, not Lev. Gideon Lev. Lev means heart. Good name, Gideon and Lev. And I'm, to this day, Gideon Lev.
How did you make your way from Canada to Israel?
Oh, very easily. I went with a group of 6 or 7 others my age who had been a group together in the organization, and we went to the New York Harbor, and we got on an Israeli boat. At that time, Zim had Israeli boats. One was called SS Israel, SS Zion, and SS Yerushalayim. we went on the SS Zion, and it was full of young, mostly young people who were immigrating to Israel. Not all, some were tourists, and we sang and we danced and we had a wonderful time together with the Israeli crew. I mean, it was a dream come true. Imagine coming to Israel on an Israeli boat with Israeli sailors, something unheard of for 2,000 years. And I remember we stopped in Naples, got off for, I think, a 12-hour stopover. And I remember, this is funny, going through Naples, and there are certain areas that are full of prostitutes. And I remember the prostitutes trying, I hardly knew what they wanted from us. They wanted us, guys. We were young, pretty good looking. They tried to have us come into the buildings, but we didn't. I certainly didn't. And we walked around some neighborhoods, went back to the boat, and four days later, we arrived at the Haifa port and saw the Carmel Mountains and Haifa in front of us, with the Baha'i temple in the middle, and it was just a fantastic, unbelievable dream come true. And here we are today.
How did you come to be in Kibbutz Hazorea?
Well, the process of coming to a special kibbutz was arranged according to which organization you belonged. We belonged to HaShomer HaTzair. HaShomer HaTzair was part of the Mapam Zionist Socialist Party. And they arranged, they had a good number of kibbutzim all over, and it had to do with the age of the people, the situation of the kibbutz. Kibbutz Hazorea was understaffed. It had too few people, and the first homegrown generation of about 8 or 9 first young sons and daughters of that kibbutz was very problematic socially. So they asked the movement to send more support. So they decided that our Garin, our group, which numbered around 60, 70 people, would join this kibbutz. But you can't send 70, 60 people at one time, because you have to maintain at the same time the organization in Canada and the United States. So you send groups of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 at one time, and slowly, year after year, another group. And that's how I came to Hazorea. And I didn't regret it for a moment. Hazorea was actually a kibbutz that wasn't settled by HaShomer HaTzair. It had been settled by the German student group called Blau and Weiß, Blue and White, which was an organization of university students and sometimes professors who became Israeli or Zionist Jews. Many of them had actually degrees and were doctors, and wanted to settle also in Israel. And they established Kibbutz Hazorea. And we joined it. And all my group, in years that followed, in numbers of 6, 7, 5, step by step joined it and became part of the kibbutz. And I lived there for 7 years, even while I was in the army. After a year, I had to join the army, which I did. Then we were part of building the country, plowing the fields, milking the cows. I was a dairyman. That was my profession, even before I arrived in Hazorea. And after a while, I got married and I had children. It's a long story.
How did you meet your wife?
I met my wife under kibbutz. She came on a program, on an Ulpan program, which meant she worked half a day and learned Hebrew half a day. And I, being a folk dance teacher, organized an activity once a week on the kibbutz, once for the kibbutz and once for the Ulpan. I taught Hebrew, Israeli dances, and they loved it. They loved me. And on the kibbutz, I taught folk dancing from all over the world, which I had learned in Canada, in Toronto. So it was one way of meeting young people. And that's how I met her. She was a very pretty young woman. She was, first of all, a redhead, really redhead. She was young. She was 18, 19 years old. She was smart. And she was a twin, full twin. She and her sister, Paula, twin, both came together, but decided to split. One would be in Hazorea, and one would be up in the hills, not far away, in Ramat Ein HaShofet, Kibbutz Ein HaShofet, belonging to the same kibbutz movement, the same party, but different kibbutz. And they were so alike that sometimes when Paula came to visit her sister in Hazorea, somebody would say to me, they met her, "Oh, I just saw your wife on the road." I said, "No, I don't think you saw my wife. My wife is out in the tree nursery working. I knew this must be my sister, my wife's sister, coming to visit." So that's how I met my wife.
I don't actually think we've said her name. Could you tell us her name?
Oh yeah, her name was Naomi.
How would you spell that?
Naomi, Naomi.
What was your wedding like?
My wedding was a kibbutz wedding with another 4 other couples. It was a mass wedding on the kibbutz without a rabbi, but with a kibbutz chuppah, with a kibbutz ktubah, not chuppah, ktubah, and lots of dancing and food and singing and performances. It was a lovely wedding, without a rabbi. But actually it was not officially recognized at that time. But later on it was. And the wedding was nice. The celebration was wonderful. And the relationship itself turned out to be very difficult and problematic. She was much too young. I was inexperienced. And we came from 2 different worlds. and never really deeply connected.
What world did she come from?
America. She was fully American, living in California. Besides her sister, she had two other siblings, a brother and a younger sister. Her parents, her father was Jewish, her mother was English. He had met her father met her mother in England while he was in the American Army. She was a very good woman, her mom, but totally British, totally. She was I would say, very cultural, very loved English literature, wrote poetry and other stuff. And he was a musician, loved music, taught music, and they lived in northern California, I think Humboldt County. And they were a little shocked when she told them that she's going to marry, and the marriage between us didn't last and fell apart after we had 2 children. And that's a long story, which I'm not going to tell you now because it's too long and too involved.
What are the children's names?
The children's names are Maya and Yanai.
When did you separate from your wife? Divorce?
We separated, divorced in 1970.
Did you marry anyone else after?
Yes. I married, 2 years later, I married another American woman who, with whom I have 4 children and who I was married to for 40 years. She was a poet, loved English, taught English literature, and was a very special lady.
What's her name?
Her name is Susan Deborah Lev.
And how would you spell that?
Which Susan, S-U-S-A-N. Deborah, she never used her middle name, but she did have her middle name, Deborah. And Lev, you know how it's spelled.
And your 4 children, what are their names?
My 4 children are Hadassah, Shaya, Elisha, Asher. 3 boys, 1 girl.
So in total, how many children do you have?
So all total, I have 6 children.
How many grandchildren do you have today?
Grandchildren, I have 15, and I also have 2 great-granddaughters. The oldest grandson for my oldest son has 2 daughters. And he lives also on a kibbutz, in Kibbutz Mishmar Emek, which is 5 kilometers away from Kibbutz Hazorea, also in the Jezreel Valley.
We never actually said, how old are you today, Gidon?
Today, I am 88 plus. I will be 89 in another 5 months.
Now, Reflecting back, do you find yourself often talking about the war?
Now, yes. In the last few years, yes. In the last few years, I have been more expressive, more talkative, more. I feel very relaxed about speaking about Ireland, because I think in order to prevent anything like a Holocaust of ever happening again in any form or way, it is important to know what happened, where it happened, how it happened, and how it was allowed to happen. And not only against Jews, against anybody, any minority, or any people, whether they be Muslims or Gypsies or LGBTQ people. We all have a right to live our lives without fear or sanctions or violence or threat of deportations or anything that can limit our expression of who we are.
In what context do you teach about the Holocaust now and speak about it?
I think the context is just humanity, living, having the right to live as you want, wherever you want. I think the basic message that I want to say to people is, we are all different. That doesn't make us bad people. As long as we respect the other and allow the other person to express himself, herself, without imposing or hurting those that are different from you, we should have the right to do that and to be that without fear and without limitations, as long as we respect the other. It's easily said. It's much harder done in everyday, in living. I've lived 88 years and I've seen and felt and experienced the opposite, almost to the extreme. The extreme would be if I wouldn't be sitting here talking. But everything else was pretty much extreme. And it doesn't have to be. It can be good. There is enough time, space, and areas where people can live as they wish, as long as they don't cause suffering to others.
How would you identify yourself now?
I don't know, just simply Gideon Lev. I don't think of myself as something special or extraordinary. I think, well, I am who I am. I'm at peace with who I am. And I'm prepared to express, maybe sometimes too much, my feelings, my opinions, respectfully and openly to whoever is willing to hear me and listen to me.
I'd love to talk now a bit about your social media presence. Could you tell me about the platform you use for social media?
Well, my social media essentially is TikTok. And let's make very clear, it wasn't actually my idea. I am today, and have been for the last almost 8 years, a partner with Julie Gray, who is an editor and a writer, and whom I met as a result of having written something like 80,000 words about my life, including, of course, my Holocaust experience, and wanting to make it into some kind of a book that people would find interesting to read. Not just for my family and my sons and grandsons, etc., but in general. And somehow, by sheer luck, I met Julie Gray, and though she at first said no, 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 after a while she got hooked, maybe by me. She says my blue eyes, I'm not sure. And we became a team to write a book together, The True Adventures of Gideon Lev. With a subtitle, Holocaust Survivor, Rascal, Optimist. And after having written this book, and we did receive a prize in 2020 for one of the best books of that year, we wanted to sell more books. And we hit upon the idea that maybe we'll go on TikTok. That was her idea. So we did. And in the process, we discovered there's so much hate and anti-Semitism and violence on this platform. Maybe we have to concentrate on fighting that. And that's exactly what we did and what we are doing to this very day. And it's growing. It's expanding our platform. And I'm very happy, and I'm unexpressively thankful that I met this woman who is almost 30 years younger than I, and we've become a team, a couple, a partnership in every way imaginable.
You said you encounter on social media a lot of hatred and anti-Semitism. Do you think that social media has enabled the rise of Semitism?
It's a good question. I'm not sure it has enabled. I think it always was there, but it has opened up another way of bringing it out. And maybe it's good. Maybe it's better that these people who are hateful have exposed themselves, because then we can fight it. If it's there, dormant, and still it's there, but we don't know that it's there, we have no way of fighting it. This way, okay, it's bad, sometimes horrific, what they say, what they express, but at least we can react, we can fight it, we can expose it, we can show that we're not going to stand by and have you just be hateful. And I think that's a good thing.
Is there anything else you would like to talk about?
You know, we could sit here all day, I could talk, because there's so much.
You still have him little.
You two are cute. Could also ask Gidon if you want to introduce Julie.
Okay, you want to introduce? Should we sit down or stand up?
Oh, you're standing up. Please, all the rest.
Hey, you look familiar. He's so funny. Okay. You know, it was just
French was
taping right now.
I could introduce Julie. Tell us, you told us a little bit about how you met, but there was just that day at the coffee shop. Yeah, you could introduce her, tell us how you met. Yeah, and then Julie, if you want to say something about Gidon, this is just a little moment to show the both of you how you are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, this is no other than Julie Gray, author, editor, lover, friend, partner, everything you can want. We met 7, 8 years ago in Ramat Gan, Israel, because I was looking for an editor.
And I said, no, I can't help you because I edited mostly fiction, and also because I didn't know enough about the Holocaust. I didn't feel I was the right person. He should work with somebody more scholarly or something. So I said, I know I can't help you, but I'll meet you for coffee. And when Gidon walked into the coffee shop, you know, this handsome man with these bright blue eyes kind of swept into the coffee shop. And I was like, this guy is, he's so charming. This guy is somebody I want to know. Forget the book. I want to know him. And it was also so strange for me because I had never met a Holocaust survivor in my life before I met Gidon. I've seen all the movies, I've read all the books, but I'd never actually met a Holocaust survivor. And one of the things that struck me about Gidon was that these bright blue eyes had seen Nazis, had seen such things that I'd only ever read about. And yet he was so lively and joyful and talkative, and I thought, how is this? How can he be how he is after what he's been through? So that started our relationship right there. We met for coffee again, and then we wrote a book, and then TikTok happened, and now we really are a team. We do everything together, and we teach Holocaust education. We've taught classes at Yad Vashem to Holocaust educators about how they can use social media. I have taught workshops to several former concentration camp memorials to their social media staff about how they can make better educational content, teaching about the Holocaust and teaching about their sites. So it's opened up this whole world to both of us that we wouldn't have if we hadn't met each other in that magical moment on Bialik Street.
Thank you, Julie.
בבקשה, אמיר, אתה יכול להתחיל להסביר?
All right, from this picture we see my father.
Which
And
picture? On the left?
From left to right we're going. First my grandmother, then my father Ernst, myself 3 years old Peter, and my grandfather Alfred. 1938, Karlovy Vary. Then we come to Yude, the Star of David that marked every Jew in Czechoslovakia in 1940. And my mother, a photograph that my father wore with him until the day he was sent to Auschwitz from Theresienstadt. My grandmother and grandfather, Liesel and Fritz, they were married, they were happy, and she was beautiful. She died in Esbeka, southeastern Poland, he in Treblinka. Then we have my great-grandmother, Rosa Samish, her son, my grandfather, Fritz, my mother, Doris, and my father, Ernst. And yes, I'm there too. 1934, in Prague. You don't see me because I'm in my mom's tummy. And last but not least, after the war, Dror Hechalutz Tza'ir. I'm there with a group in Karlovy Vary, a Zionist youth organization planning to go and build up Israel. I'm right on the right-hand corner, and my best friend is on the left. His name is Michael. We are both still alive and both survived Theresienstadt for 4 years.
Next. מה זה פולק דנסינג? מה הכוונה בעברית פולק? כאילו ריקודי דיסקו, עם?
פולק דנסינג? ריקודי עם.
ריקודי עם, נכון?
Yeah.
זה מדהים איזה דמיון משפחתי.
מה?
זה מדהים איזה, כאילו, כמה כולם נראים ממש כמו משפחה.
כן.
יש משפחות שכל אחד נראה שונה, וזאת ממש, זה עץ ממש.
כן.
Ja.
בבקשה.
This is a picture of a soccer game in Theresienstadt. I loved soccer. From time to time, there were games. Sometimes us boys played soccer too, with a ball made of rags. We cut up old clothing, cut it in strips, made it a ball, and played. I loved soccer, and this is a photo of a drawing that I must have done sometimes in 1944, as you see the address, date, but I don't remember doing it. But it is me because I wrote my name there.
Mm-hmm.
He's already in Rome going to school.
Ah, okay. Now I understand the amount of time, yeah.
He's already married. The beard, and he has a son.
He does, he has
He
distinct
doesn't yet.
Well, they have made promises to us at the Shoah Foundation that Yidon is invited to the big gala in New York in a few months, which would be pretty cool because one of his wishes is to meet, the man,
Yeah.
the myth, the legend, to some soundstage to do something. And everybody's like, South Park. Everybody ran outside and he got out of his car and he went inside.
The testimony, would you like to send to your email address? Hello at Julie Grace.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, that's so awesome to preserve that. It's a lot of Jewish people who live through the work. It's hard to get this together, much less to find information about what happened to everybody. I think I told you we've done a little work with the Arlson Archives
Yeah.
in Germany. They've, they used to be the International Tracing Service, which is how Gidon was found.
That's from the Theresienstadt.
Theresienstadt, yeah.
The Theresienstadt.
But you get into this interesting thing because it's like they own it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not for Gidon's family. It was their piece to his mother when he was being sent to Auschwitz. He sort of threw it up and went down.
Right, yeah.
And he doesn't have it with him anymore because he gave it to his daughter in California. And he told Yad Vashem about it, and they said, we will pay to make a replica that you can have. We can put the original in the museum, and we might do that. Now it's in California. We're not going to put it in the mail, but we might do that because, to have a replica of this